Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're diving into Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man by Mary L. Trump, Ph.D. It's a book that offers a psychological perspective on a former president. And get this, it's from his niece.
Not your everyday perspective.
Right. It's like getting a behind-the-scenes look, but with the therapist's lens.
Exactly. Mary doesn't just tell stories. She analyzes them,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how Donald Trump's personality developed.
And she starts with this really vivid scene. She's at the White House, 2017, invited to a family dinner. Even before going inside, she sees vendors selling buttons that say things like, "Deport Trump," and "Trump is a witch."
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Talk about an intense atmosphere.
Yeah.
And then inside, her room is like a shrine to the Trump brand.
Yeah.
Everything is branded. The shampoo, even the wine.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Rhine, because she points out that growing up, alcohol was strictly forbidden in their family.
Yeah, I caught that too.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder about the environment he grew up in, if a glass of wine was considered taboo.
Exactly. And this detail about alcohol actually gives us a glimpse into the strict and controlled environment Mary describes. She talks about her grandfather, Fred Trump, as the patriarch who ruled the family with an iron fist.
This dinner at the White House, it wasn't all about the wine, though. Donald's sister, Mary Ann, she brings up a childhood incident where their older brother, Freddie, dumped mashed potatoes on Donald's head. Seems like typical kid stuff.
Yeah.
But Mary emphasizes how deeply it affected Donald.
Even decades later.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it gives you a glimpse into his sensitivity to humiliation, which Mary suggests might be a key trait.
Interesting.
She even says that Donald, at this White House dinner, reacts as if he's that same 7-year-old boy again.
So we're already seeing this connection between his childhood and his adult behavior.
Exactly. And this is where Mary's background as a clinical psychologist comes in. She uses her knowledge of psychology to analyze Donald's behavior, suggesting he shows signs of narcissism and maybe even other disorders. She even speculates about an undiagnosed learning disability.
That's a bold assessment coming from his own niece.
It is, and it raises the question, why should we care about Donald Trump's childhood or his possible psychological makeup?
I think it's because understanding his background, the family dynamics he grew up with, can give us insights into his actions, his motivations, his decision-making. Not about excusing his behavior, but more about understanding the forces that shaped him.
Makes sense. So let's delve deeper into that childhood. Mary talks about her parents, Fred and Mary Trump, and the atmosphere in their household.
Okay.
She describes a home where emotions were suppressed, showing weakness was considered a failure. And much of this stemmed from Fred's personality and his own upbringing. He valued toughness above all else. It's like he wanted to create this image of strength and invincibility.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this actually connects back to that philosophy of positive thinking we touched upon earlier.
Oh, right.
What exactly was Fred's worldview?
Well, he was a devoted follower of Norman Vincent Peale, this popular minister who preached the power of positive thinking. But Mary argues that in Fred's case, it became distorted. This belief that any problem, any setback, was the individual's fault.
So instead of empathy, there was blame.
Yeah, pretty much. And this deeply impacted how he raised his children, especially his sons, Freddie and Donald. It's amazing how different the two brothers were, Freddie and Donald. They reacted so differently to their father's personality.
In what way?
Well, Freddie, the older brother,
Yeah.
was more easygoing. He liked things like boating and fishing.
Yeah.
Things that didn't fit with Fred's idea of success.
He sounds like a completely different person.
Yeah.
More sensitive.
Yeah, maybe even more artistic.
Yeah.
And that clashed with Fred's expectations. He wanted a tough son, a killer.
Wow.
Yeah. He criticized Freddie constantly, belittled his interests. It created this dynamic where Freddie always felt punished.
Like he could never measure up.
Exactly.
And
Donald was the opposite. More aggressive. Didn't seem bothered by his father's words, unfortunately. This just reinforced Fred's beliefs.
like it validated his approach
Exactly. He saw Donald's temperament as the key to success.
and favored him even more.
Right.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Fred saw what he wanted to see in Donald.
And ignored the impact on both sons.
Yeah. This dynamic also affected their career paths.
How so?
Well, Freddie was pushed towards the family business.
Even though he wasn't happy there.
Right. He actually tried to break free. He became a pilot for TWA.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was great at it.
You'd think Fred would have been proud.
Not at all. He saw it as a betrayal, a rejection of the family.
Wow.
This disapproval, combined with the constant pressure, led Freddie to leave TWA.
What happened after that?
He went into a downward spiral,
Yeah.
struggling with alcoholism. He died young.
At 42.
Yeah.
It's really tragic. Makes you think. Maybe things could have been different if Fred had been more accepting.
It's a question Mary explores in the book. She also talks about how Fred controlled their finances. Even as adults,
Really?
Freddie was denied a mortgage because Fred didn't think he was responsible enough. And Mary Ann, Donald's sister, had to rely on their mother for money.
Because Fred wouldn't give her access to her inheritance.
Exactly.
So control was a big part of the family dynamic.
Absolutely. And it's within this context that we see Donald's rise in Manhattan real estate.
And I'm guessing Fred played a role in that.
Oh, yeah. He used his wealth and connections to help Donald. When Donald wanted into Manhattan real estate, Fred backed him.
Both financially and with strategy.
Exactly. It's almost as if he saw in Donald a chance to achieve the success he never had.
Interesting. But even with Fred's help, Donald's businesses weren't always successful.
Right.
He had financial troubles.
Yeah.
He even had to rely on bank bailouts.
That's where you see a real difference between Fred's approach and Donald's.
Fred was more conservative,
Very much so.
and Donald was more of a risk taker.
Yeah. Sometimes reckless.
What about when Fred's health declined? Especially with Alzheimer's. Did that change their relationship?
Sadly, no. Mary describes how Donald actually took advantage of his father's condition.
Wow.
Yeah, to gain more control over the finances. She even talks about finding her father crying after a visit from Donald.
That's sad. Not the image of a loving family.
No, it isn't. Mary also shares her personal experience with Donald's manipulative side.
Oh.
She ghost wrote his book, The Art of the Comeback. And she describes how he distorted things, inflated his successes, and downplayed failures.
So he always wanted to present himself in the best light.
Exactly.
These patterns of manipulation, they were there long before politics.
Absolutely. And they become even more obvious after Fred's death.
Oh.
The reading of his will starts a family fight, exposing all the resentment that had been building for years.
It sounds like it brought out the worst in everyone.
It did. Mary and Freddie's children are basically cut out, really shows the favoritism.
It does.
And it gets worse. The family cuts off medical insurance. For Mary's son, William, he suffered from seizures.
That's awful.
It is. This disregard for others, this using money as a weapon, it's a recurring theme in Mary's story of the Trumps.
So even after death, Fred's control continued.
Yes, it really shows how ingrained these behaviors were. And in this context, Mary tries to make sense of the man who became president.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But it also makes you think about childhood experiences.
Yeah.
How they shape our worldview, our relationship.
And ultimately, our choices.
As we wrap up this deep dive into too much and never enough, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts? What should listeners remember about Mary's analysis of Donald Trump?
I think she shows us that to understand Donald Trump, you have to understand his family.
The dynamics that shaped him.
Exactly. His father's drive for success, his need for constant praise, the belief that weakness was unacceptable.
It created an environment
Yeah.
where winning was everything.
Right.
And that mentality, it seems to have affected everything. His business, his relationships, in his presidency.
It's like Mary's arguing that his need for validation, his inability to handle criticism, stem from deep insecurity.
Insecurities from childhood
They say-
makes you wonder, was he ever capable of empathy?
It's a hard question, but Mary's insights give us a framework.
To understand his actions,
Right.
not to excuse them,
Uh,
but to see how his past shaped him. Too Much and Never Enough is a challenging read, but it's also very insightful. It forces us to confront the complexities of human nature.
and the impact of childhood.
Yeah,
It's a book that stays with you.
it does. And for our listeners, if you're interested in the Trump family and Donald Trump's upbringing, we highly recommend this book. You can find a link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more book analyses.
Until next time, keep those minds nourished.